Home Secretary has apologised today after a long-awaited Cabinet Office inquiry found she broke Ministerial Code of Ethics over claims of bullying. Priti Patel released a statement saying that my behaviour in the past has upset people. In the last hour, Sir Alex Allen, the government standard advisor, has resigned after the PM rejected his findings that Patel had breached standards. Boris Johnson said he had full confidence in the Home Secretary. Dave Penman is General Secretary of the FDA union, which represents professionals and managers in public service. Dave, afternoon to you. Is this a case of, what are you reading into this? Somebody's accused of something, they say sorry, job done, right?
Well, when they launched the investigation, the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Michael Gove, said he'd asked Sir Alex Allen to establish the facts. Which they have done. They've spoken to civil servants and other people who've given evidence about the Home Secretary's behaviour. As the Prime Minister's advisor, Sir Alex Allen has then provided advice about what evidence that they had demonstrated that the Home Secretary had breached the Ministerial Code, and that clearly was his conclusion. He concluded that she had bullied staff, that the behaviour was such that it breached the Ministerial Code, but the Prime Minister has chosen to ignore that evidence and has essentially made a political judgment rather than a judgment on the facts. And we have a situation where this whole thing was started by the resignation of Sir Philip Rutnam, who indicated that he had raised these concerns about the Home Secretary and that he was then targeted as a result. He's been vindicated because the issues that he says he raised have now been found to be fact, yet the Prime Minister has simply ignored all of those issues. When this started, the Prime Minister stood up at Prime Minister Questions and said, "I'm backing Priti." 9 months later, that's just exactly what he's done.
She said sorry. She said sorry, though, Dave, didn't she? I mean, she said sorry if my behaviour has upset people in the past.
The role of the Prime Minister is to decide, because he's the sole arbiter of the Ministerial Code. No one else gets to decide whether there's investigation. No one else gets to decide whether the Ministerial Code has been breached. So whether she says sorry or not, the point is the Prime Minister is supposed to enforce the behaviours of ministers through the Ministerial Code. He chose, when he became Prime Minister, to put front and centre in his own words, in his own foreword to the Ministerial Code, there must be no bullying and no harassment. What was the point of that if when the evidence is found of bullying, he chooses to ignore it?
But do you remove somebody's
choice, which is the politics?
Okay, but you can say sorry. I mean, who knows what the nature of these allegations were? But what we do know is that in the civil service, if you ask somebody to shut the door in the wrong way, they'll tell you you've been guilty of something that intimidated them. There is that difficulty, isn't there? Because people have a job for life.
It's not a civil service. It's not a civil service I recognise, or a job for life that I recognise. I've been.
Come on, Dave. It's a horrendous institutionalised culture that's been in need of reform for absolutely years. It's a great privileged club to be part of. You've got a job for life. It doesn't matter whether you hit a target. You'll never get fired. You've pretty much got to murder somebody to lose your job. If you feel stressed, you're off work for 6 months and nobody will question that. And the stress might be related to the fact that somebody gave you a simple instruction. I've seen that happen. You must have seen that happen.
Yeah, well, I don't know what we'd be doing as a union or why we're necessary if that's the case and it's such a cushy number. The UK civil service... Because
you guys fuel that. You love that. That's what you do, isn't it? Because those people come to you, they say they're disgruntled.
The UK civil service was ranked the most effective civil service in the world by an independent business school, the only rankings of its type. It recognised the UK civil service was the top civil service amongst most modern economies. The civil service that is now 25% smaller than it was when the Conservatives came to power in 2010, yet has delivered the same, that is delivering Brexit, that has responded to COVID, that is paying 9 million people the job furlough scheme, that's coped with a six-fold increase in universal credit claims. That's the civil service that I recognise, but that's not...
Well, that's what people are paid to do. It's not a charity.
Evidence. This is about evidence. This is about the Prime Minister asked Sir Alex Allen to find the evidence, to establish the facts. That's the words he used.
Cool, I don't disagree.
The facts were established.
Found the facts. Priti Patel's apologised. Boris Johnson has said, OK, that's all done and dusted, we move on. So the only satisfactory result for you would be a firing.
The Ministerial Code has been breached. So if there is no consequence for the ministerial code being breached, remember Priti Patel is a minister who has previously breached the ministerial code. It just seems extraordinary that we can even say that. Here's someone who has now twice breached the ministerial code, once for conducting her own foreign policy, and she resigned as a result of that, and a second time have been found to breach it in terms of her treatment for staff. But I tell you why this is important. It's not just about the feelings of civil servants, it's about effective government. We need government to work. And that means civil servants and ministers need to work together. Okay. Bullies don't make for effective managers. They don't make for effective leaders.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, what is a bully, Dave? What is a bully? What's the difference between a bully and someone who happens to be robust or tells people things they don't like to hear? Dave, we stop there for no other reason than time. Dave Penman, who's the General Secretary of the FDA Union. They represent professionals and managers in public service. Again, I have to stress, we don't know the full details of this. If it turned out that Priti Patel had done something absolutely horrendous, I'd be the first to say she's got to go. There's a hypothetical nature to this. I mean, let's use the Priti Patel story, if you like, as a catalyst for the wider issue that we know happens in the curious world we found ourselves in, that a simple instruction to somebody who doesn't like the feel or the sense of that instruction will be seen as bullying. And that's where I've seen this with my own eyes time and time and time again. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be saying this. So I'm aware that there can very easily be another side to an allegation of bullying. It's so horrendous when the minute somebody uses that word, I feel bullied. And actually what's happened is that person has been asked to change something or do something different, or not got a promotion, etc. Coutinho is a Conservative MP for East Surrey. Afternoon to you. What's the point, Claire Coutinho, of having a head of standards if you're going to ignore everything they say?
Well, as someone who works in government, I think it is really important that the PM is the final arbiter. He's clearly looked at the facts that Alex Allen has put together. And I noticed that Alex Allen said he was right to take the final judgment. And his judgment has been that the Home Sec hasn't breached the ministerial code.
But what one assumes that if you have a man who's in charge of standards and concludes that she has, then how is there a further process that usurps his? I can understand the PM could say, OK, I agree, yep, that's fine, but I'm still going to keep her. But to reject it and say that she hasn't seems to not just dilute, but almost obliterate the role of having anybody working as a standards advisor, surely.
Well, I think the standards advisor's played a really important role. He's looked at all the evidence, he's put that together. But he himself has said it was right for the PM to take the final decision. And the one thing I would say is, looking at the facts of this, I mean, it's a very sort of grey situation. No one told her that she was upsetting people. There was clearly failings on the civil service. It's admitted that she was right to be frustrated. And ultimately, she's doing this really important job with delivering police, immigration, COVID response, and all of these things. And I can understand the PM's decided that actually, the situation's improved. Clearly, she's apologised, and he doesn't feel that wasn't a breach that happened.
Well, what's the word on the street over there at the Tory party then, Claire? I'm sure you have you're a trusted member of the Conservatives. I'm sure you've got your ear to the ground. I'm sure people come to you with all sorts of tittle-tattle. What do we think was going on over there at the Home Office?
Well, I mean, I have no idea what was going on in the Home Office, but what I can tell you, and you'll have seen over the last couple of days, is that Priti Patel has widespread support in the Tory party. She's seen as someone who is robust. She's seen as someone who is delivering change and these really key parts of the agenda that we care about, like increasing the police numbers, changing the immigration system, and so on. And I think, the thing that has won her support is the fact that she's got a forceful nature. And I think sometimes that is needed to try and deliver these really, really big projects.
Is it okay to bully someone in the workplace?
Well, no, of course it's not okay to bully someone in the workplace, but I don't think it's very clear.
So she should go then?
Here. Well, I don't think it is very clear what's happened here. If you look at all the facts, like no one had told her she was upsetting people. And, it was on occasion that she may have raised frustrations, and she was in a very frustrating, environment. She wasn't being supported by the civil service. So I don't think it's very clear what's happened. But I think what is clear now is that she should get our full support. She has the PM support. We know the situation has improved in the Home Office, and she's got a very important job to deliver.
Claire Coutinho, thank you, MP for East Surrey. She has a very important job to deliver, says a Conservative colleague of hers. I know that comes under the bracket of, well, she would say that, wouldn't she? Somebody here says, this is Robert, I work for a company that really care about their employees. However, sometimes I'd like a bit of extra pressure, as I know this would get more out of me. I fully agree with you about how putting the extra pressure on when it's required. And that's the problem with the civil service. And it's the problem, my experience at the BBC, which is a government-funded organisation where the same kind of thing, you really cannot lose. It was just incredible to watch people squeal and shout injustice and be fuming that they might be asked to do something differently. They might be asked to change their work practices. They might be asked to stand aside and allow somebody else to do something. It was just a complete culture of a kind of victim culture, I would say, which is tragic, really. I was there for a year and a half or something, and I can remember latterly, we'd have these editorial meetings, and no senior manager ever said anything critical about the show, ever. Literally ever. Everybody just congratulated him. Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, great guess. It's like, well, hang on a second. What do you mean great guess? It wasn't great. We had this person, and they should never have been on a breakfast show. Should never have appeared on it. Nobody said anything. Nobody wanted to be in a place where they told somebody what to do, and the minute that they did, or the minute they criticised, or the minute they asked for something to alter, all hell broke loose, and unions got involved. People complained. They were sniping behind people's backs. And this, by the way, I work with some fantastic people at the BBC, people I absolutely respect. All of those people know precisely who they are, if some of them happen to be listening right now. But I'm talking more about the culture and the practice of. It takes nothing to snitch on somebody, and that snitching isn't based on a cast iron case of injustice. It's based on the fact that you've transposed your own feeling into an injustice. So somebody gets told that they either they're not going to be covering a certain shift, or somebody else is doing it, or they've been asked to refine the way they do something, or change a feature that they've been, something like that. And they go home and they stew on it. And that bit of lead that you get in the pit of your tummy when you're feeling worried about something. And they translate that, the natural feeling, by the way, because you can feel aggrieved, you can feel peed off, you can go, well, I'm fuming about this. But to then turn that into some kind of injustice, and then, of course, somebody comes along and says, this week we've got the councillors in the building, and if you've got any grievances and anything you want to say, the door is open, it's all confidential, in you go. And they all queue up and go, yeah, this happened. It's like, no, I'm sorry, you cannot translate your feeling of being annoyed about a decision with some kind of, I've been made to feel uncomfortable. So your uncomfortability translates as an injustice. And you know what? Because you start getting into that territory of mental health, when you start talking stress, it's all hands off. Oh, I'm really sorry. Okay, don't worry. We'll make it happen. You can do this now. You can do that. Don't worry. Nothing to see here. It's an outrage. It's an absolute outrage. This is being done with other people's money. And I would imagine in the civil service, Priti Patel's gone in there. Speak to any former Home Secretary. They'll tell you it's as mad as a box of frogs down there at the Home Office. It's still a massive department. It used to be one department. They cut it into two, if you remember, and formed the Ministry of Justice. And it's still massive and bureaucratic. So you can imagine Priti Patel pitching up going, this has got to change, guys. We need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. And you can just see the noses put out of joint and those people going home absolutely fuming. They've got to actually work for their money. They've got to do something different. I'm taking time off stress. Sorry, the Home Secretary has made me feel bilious. I'm off stressed. Well, that's bullying, isn't it? Because I'm off stressed. What, because you don't agree because you've been asked to do something? Not necessarily. By the way, I'll caveat this. We don't know what happened in the Home Office, but I can understand the culture and the contemporary response that we sort of seem to have with all manner of things, where if it goes wrong, you transpose it as a grievance, and the grievance becomes bullying, and you kind of convince yourself where all that's actually happened is that somebody more senior than you has asked you to do something you disagree with. That's usually what happens. But over to your workplace. What's going on over there in your own world? None of this, by the way, dilutes the very real and chronically upsetting nature of bullying. No one's going to pretend that doesn't happen. And if you've been on the receiving end of it, that isn't a pleasant place to be. I get it. And I want to hear from you in that respect. But I'd also like to hear from you if you've worked for bosses that are just robust and honest, and they're a bit outlandish and a bit controversial. But boy, did they get results. And they did that with, they'll have a swear up once in a while. So what? So what? If you did that at the BBC, I promise you, you'd need casters on your backside because your feet wouldn't touch the ground as you were kicked out the door.